שלום מלאך עליון ממלך מלכי מלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא
ממלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא Hello, my holy sisters and brothers. A good and Erev Shabbos to you. That was the Moshav band singing Shalom Aleichem. You know, that's such an important song. We sing it by our Shabbos table on Friday nights. There's that old dirge like, Shalom Aleichem, Malachei HaSharet, which is nice. But it's so much jazzier, and this is the way we usually do it. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Mimelech, Malachei HaMelachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the song itself is so important. We say, welcome and peace to you, angels, messengers of the divine who come to our Shabbos table. May you bless us with peace. Welcome to you. So peace be upon you, messengers from the divine. Welcome to our table. Bless us with your peace, and may you go in peace. And that refers to this idea that angels accompany us on Shabbos. There's always two angels that accompany us when we come home from praying on Shabbos for the Friday night dinner. And and it's a good angel and a bad angel. And actually this kind of ties into what we're going to be talking about today on our daf with evil spirits. But these are both messengers of the divine, but one is sort of in favor of the humans and the other is against the humans, right? So the good angel and the bad angel. And if they come home with us and they find the house prepared for Shabbos and the candles shining bright and a beautiful table laid out and food cooking for a great meal, then they say, may it, the good angel says, and so may it be next week. And the bad angel is forced to say, Amen. But if we come home to a house in discord and people are fighting and no one is ready for Shabbos and the peace of Shabbos hasn't settled on the household, as it were, then the bad angel says, and so may it be next week. And the good angel is forced to say, Amen. So let's make it so that the good angel has what to praise in our homes. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we do a little beautiful learning on a Friday afternoon, getting ready for Shabbos. Oh, I see in the comments that somebody likes the shirt. Good Shabbos! And yes, this is an AT shirt available in our store, and Nina just put that link in the comments. Okay. Who is with us as we get it going over here? Yehudit in South Carolina, James in Indy, Bill in Berkeley, Paula's in the house, Lindsay in Cincinnati, Pauline in Arkansas, Judy says Shabbat Shalom, Marion in New York, Ann in California, Tom wishing everyone a good Shabbos, Irma in Davidson, Oklahoma, Judy in California, Amir, I'm not sure where that is. Wait, see translation. In Pakistan, welcome Amir. I'll tell you, we have a nice community in Pakistan. There's quite a few people that tune in to our learning from Pakistan, and we're so glad that you're here. Baruch haba, welcome. Christopher in Arkansas, Irma loves the shirt. Delana in Lockhart, Texas, Patricia, Shabbat Shalom. Zach says, why do we say each verse of the Shalom Aleichem 3 times if there are 2 angels? You know, I'm not sure, but it may be, as we've seen, the number 3 is special in Judaism for various reasons. It's the 3rd word of that first verse. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you and guard you, right? So that third word of the blessing, how we bless our children and how the Kohanim, the priests, bless us in the temple when the temple is standing. And still we do the Kohanic blessings on Shabbos and on festivals. And so the 3rd word is about being guarded, but also because in the Talmud we have this idea of the chazaka, when something happens 3 times, it is established, right? Twice could be a coincidence. 3 times is a pattern, and perhaps that's why we say it 3 times, so it really sticks, as it were. Irma says, thanks, Nina. Ilana likes the bell. Adam is in Fort Myers. Kathy says, good Shabbos. And Mark wishing us Shabbat Shalom from Rochester. Over there on the YouTube side, Marjorie wishing us a good Shabbos from Georgia. Welcome, everybody. Okay, we are on Daf Kuf Yud Aleph, page 111, here in Tractate Pesachim, the 4th volume of the Talmud, the Laws of Passover. We're in chapter 10, still discussing Mishnah number 1 of chapter 10, 12 pages later. We're in a lengthy, you could call it a digression, basically about demonology in the Talmud, but these are kind of practical advice to avoid trouble from demons. According to the sages, we're having this discussion because we've been talking, what the Mishna says is that we have to have 4 cups of wine on Passover. That sounds great to us. In the ancient world, drinking in pairs, drinking 2 cups of wine at a time, an even number of cups, was thought to make a person vulnerable to attack both from evil spirits and demons and from witchcraft and sorcery. It was just that was just their understanding that those things could open you up. The sages in the Holy Land were not concerned about drinking in pairs, but the sages in the larger and more active community, because it wasn't being oppressed by Rome, over there in the Babylonian Jewish community, lived in the midst of a culture and society that was very concerned with protection from evil spirits and demons. And some of that really crept into the Jewish culture. And so they kind of applied scripture and Jewish teachings to our understanding of how to avoid those dangers. And so that's why we've been studying these kind of practical measures. First, for the last few days, we were talking about, do we really have a concern for drinking in pairs, an even number of cups? As we talked about yesterday, the numbers seem extraordinary. They drank so many glasses of wine, but it was diluted wine. And this was just from me, speculating yesterday that part of the reason, and I actually have heard this, that part of the reason that they had to mix alcohol and water is because the water was dangerous. And this idea that water could harm you, standing water or water even from a well, water could always become harmful. I mean, we know now very well the kinds of germs and microbes that could get into water. And so actually adding some alcohol was quite helpful. So it's not that they were drinking so many cups of wine to get drunk. They weren't. But they would just drink over the course of a long meal, and it was important to them to drink an odd number of cups rather than an even number of cups. That was where we got into this discussion, and now once we started talking about, once the sages started this discussion about when we open ourselves up to harm from these demons and evil spirits, so that's from that spiritual realm, or from witches and sorcerers who might, access energies from that realm, but there's an actual human being who's directing a malevolent force at you. Again, you want to be protected from that kind of harm. All right, we're picking it up near the top of page 111 on the A side here in Tractate Pesachim. Resh Lakish said, there are 4 matters that the one who performs them, his blood is upon his own head, and he is liable for his own life due to the evil spirit that rests upon him. Now, let's just take that in the context of something the sages often say in the Talmud, is that one who endangers his life, his blood is upon his head. I mean, that's just a pretty common sense type of statement there. The sages are not into danger. They are risk-averse people. And recently, I remember there was a case that happened. Some people went, they pitched a tent and were camping, and they set it up at night. I believe this happened in England. And then in the morning, they got arrested for endangering themselves. Where had they pitched their tent? Like on the edge of a cliff. And I think they didn't even realize how dangerous the place where they put that tent was. So the sages are like, don't put yourself in unnecessary danger, because when you do, So then you're relying on heaven to perform a miracle for you. Possibly you may need a miracle to be saved from the danger in which you put yourself in. Avoid those situations. It ought to go without saying, but some people are very risk. What's the opposite of risk averse? I guess risk taking, right? Some people are just very risk taking. Sages say, don't do that. All right. So with regard to these evil spirits, there are certain behaviors that if you indulge in them, you're just putting yourself in harm's way. And Reish Lakish says there's 4 matters like that. What are they? One who relieves himself in a spot between a palm tree and a wall. These palm trees are going to keep coming up. There's this link between palm trees and evil spirits. One who passes between 2 palm trees. One who drinks borrowed water. And one who passes over spilled water, even if his wife poured it out in front of him. So you know what the source of the water spill is. And the Gemara elaborates, with regard to one who relieves himself between a palm tree and a wall, we said that he places himself in danger only when there are not 4 cubits of space between the 2 objects. However, if there are 4 cubits, we have no problem with it. The demons have enough room to pass, and he will not obstruct them. So the 2 sort of givens that go along with that, number 1 is that demons are attracted to palm trees. There's something about palm trees that you always want to be cautious. And second, what's interesting is, well, if you have enough space between you and between the palm tree and some immovable obstruction like a wall, then it's not going to be a problem because the demons can pass unimpeded. So what you see there is, it's not that the demons are always looking to attack the humans. They're not. These demons, they're kind of small and they're opportunistic, right? They'll sort of take on a human if they think they can get away with it. But generally, they would consider that we are more powerful beings than they are, and they're going to avoid us. But if you put yourself in a spot where you and the demon are going to occupy the same space, and they're not going to have a choice, well, then they might harm you. You might as well think of this like it's very similar to wild animals. Wild animals really don't want to have anything to do with human beings. But if you put yourself too close to them, okay, then they might harm you because they feel they have no choice. Here we go. Where are we? And furthermore, even when there are not 4 cubits, we said there is a problem only when the demons have no other route beside that one. However, if the demons have another route, we have no problem with it. So we see that it's not like demons are always lurking, looking to attack us. It's that we need to avoid putting ourselves in a situation where we're going to be up close and personal, where demons inhabit. And with regard to one who passes between 2 palm trees, we said that he is in danger only if a public domain does not cross between them. However, if a public domain crosses between them, we have no problem with it, as demons are not permitted to cause harm in a public place. And with regard to one who drinks borrowed water, we said it is dangerous only if a minor borrowed it. However, if an adult borrowed the water, we have no problem with it. So now we're learning a few more things. First of all, demons drink. They drink water. They get thirsty. And they're more likely to take water and attack the water carrier if he's a minor, somebody who is, weaker of body, a juvenile, an undeveloped human, a young human, is one that's going to be more vulnerable to harm from evil spirits, both because they're physically less developed and because they're mentally less developed. They're younger, they're less experienced, they're less sure of themselves. And this is not maybe that surprising. And this idea that we're not concerned if there's a public domain passing between the palm trees, right? Because these evil spirits don't come at us when we're in crowds, when we're in public places. They attack the people who are isolated and alone and in the dark, as we'll see. And with regard to one who passes over spilled water, we said he places himself in danger only if no one sprinkled dirt over it and no one spat in it. However, if someone sprinkled dirt over it or spat in it, we have no problem with it. And isn't there like a thing, the kind of the superstitions of the old world of Europe when people would, want to shoo away evil spirits. They would spit, pa, 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 and say shoo, 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 that kind of thing. Not so dissimilar to these practices that we're learning about from a couple thousand years ago. And we said this is a concern only if the sun did not pass over it, i.e. if it occurred at night, and 60 steps of people walking in the area have not passed over it. However, if the sun passed over it and 60 steps passed over it, we have no problem with it, right? So if spilled water is a problem with evil spirits, but only at night and only in a secluded place. If people walking over it, if the sun is shining on it, not a danger that demons are going to be hovering there. And we said this is a concern only if he was not riding a donkey and not wearing shoes. However, if he was riding a donkey and wearing shoes, we have no problem with it, right? So the donkey gets you off the ground. Wearing shoes keeps your feet off the places where these evil spirits tread. And the Gemara comments, and all this applies only where there is no reason for concern for witchcraft, as no one is interested in harming him. However, where there is a concern for witchcraft, even if all these limiting conditions are in place, we are nevertheless concerned, right? So the evil spirits are just kind of hanging out in their own realm, doing their things. And if we kind of intersect with them, we can put ourselves in harm's way, but they're not looking to harm us. However, if you have reason to believe that somebody might be directing witchcraft or sorcery at you, in other words, there's a human being directing malevolent energy at you, then you need to take extra precautions, right? Because those people will focus that energy on you. It's much less of a random attack, as it were. We are concerned. And this is similar to what happened to a certain man who was riding a donkey and wearing shoes, which is normally protection against these forces. Nevertheless, he passed over spilled water and his shoes shrank and his feet shriveled up. The Gemara continues to discuss this issue. The sages taught 3 objects should not be allowed to pass between 2 men walking along a road, and people should not walk between 2 of them, right? So, this is ancient world, right? Ancient world. So a dog, a palm tree, and a woman, right? So if 2 men are walking down the street and a dog, and they're walking together and chatting, and then a dog passes between them, that's a danger. If the 2 of them are walking together and a palm tree passes between them, that's a danger. And if a woman passes between them, that's a danger. Now, that would have been quite unusual in the ancient world where there were certain, sort of laws of modesty and decorum. A woman wouldn't go out of her way to walk between 2 men. The 2 men would sort of go to one side, she would go to the other, and just laws of modesty. So a woman who is so brazen as to actually walk between 2 men might be suspected of witchcraft in the ancient world. And also a pig. And some say also a snake. And the Gemara asks, and if they pass between them, what is the remedy to prevent one from harm? And Rav Papa said he should begin reciting a verse that starts with a name of God and ends with the same name of God. In other words, he should recite the passage from the book of Numbers, chapter 23, verses 22 and 23. God, who brought them out of Egypt, is for them like the lofty horns of the wild ox. For there is no enchantment in Jacob, nor is there any divination within Israel. Now is it said of Jacob and of Israel, what has been performed by God. So it begins and ends with that same name of God. And this verse indicates that spells, generally evil forces and spells and incantations, are not effective against the Jewish people. Now that's written in the Torah. Right, so we have laws, first of all, that no Jew shall engage in witchcraft or sorcery. That is an abomination. That is an absolute Torah transgression to engage in witchcraft. And that such spells and witchcraft will not be effective against Jews. So if that's true, why are the sages so concerned to give us all this practical advice to, avoid these kinds of evil spots and evil places? I mean, if witchcraft is not effective against the nation, why should individuals be concerned? And one answer might be that witchcraft is not effective against the nation, but individuals should be concerned because they're separated from the nation, at least at that moment, when they might be coming into harm's way. But it also jives with what we said yesterday. The sages advise that these evil forces are actually more likely to attack somebody who is obsessed with avoiding evil forces. So you're better off not really paying much heed to this stuff. However, we're not free to totally ignore it. So we learn these laws. We don't put ourselves in obviously dangerous situations according to the sages, and we let it go at that. There is no, we're spending a few pages on it, so it seems like it's a big concern. But, it's just a few pages out of 2,711 pages of the Talmud. So this stuff crops up here and there, but it is by no means, highly important material or something that the sages obsess over. Nevertheless, let us continue our journey through this material. Where am I? Alternatively, so that verse from Numbers 23:22 that begins and ends with the name of God is something that you can say to ward off these evil spirits. Alternatively, he should open with a verse that begins with the word no, and should conclude with the same verse that ends in no. So here we're looking at Numbers 23:19. No man is God that he should lie, neither the Son of Man that he should repent. When he has said, what he has said, will he not do it? Or when he has spoken, will he not make it good? And the way the Hebrew syntax works there, the verse ends in no. So in other words, that's actually the verse just a couple verses before the first one that we read. So God has promised to protect the Jewish people from this kind of harm. Anything that God has promised, you can count on will come true. So you can rely on God to protect you. Nevertheless, when you're in one of those situations, and remember, particularly they were speaking to an audience in Babylonia that was surrounded by a culture that was rather obsessed with protecting themselves from harm from evil spirits. And so the people kind of absorbed that, right? And so the sages were speaking to their audience, as it were, to the Jewish community there in Bavel, that kind of absorbed the fears of the surrounding culture, and they wanted to know what in their own tradition was available to protect them from this kind of harm, and the sages are answering that. Similarly, I'm just going to skip that one and go. Okay, so if there's two women who are sitting at a crossroads, one on this side of the road and the other on the other side, and they are facing each other, they are certainly engaging in witchcraft. What is the remedy for one who walks by? If there is another route, he should go by it. And if there's no other route, if there's another person with him, they should hold hands and switch places. And if there is no other person with him, he should say as follows: Igeret, Aslat, Asiya, Belusia are killed by arrows. And these are the names of demons who are invoked by witches. And the people are now saying these demons have no power over us. You should focus your witchcraft on someone else. And the Gemara cites a related statement. One who meets a woman when she is ascending from a ritual immersion in a mikvah as her mitzvah, meaning after her time of the month, she went to immerse in the mikvah before she and her husband are permitted to each other again. And now this man who's walking along somewhere kind of happens to be there. For example, you can immerse in a mikveh in a private building. That's where mikvahs are these days. But you could also immerse in a river or a lake or the ocean, right? So if the woman is ascending from immersing in the waters of mikvah, so she's naked, right? And so if this man happens to see her, he should avert his eyes. But if he happened to see her naked, so this is a situation that is fraught with peril. So if he happens to see her like that, he sees her. In other words, if a man sees a naked woman, now he's got a problem, right? So if he has intercourse with any woman shortly after that, like with his wife, a spirit of immorality will overtake him. Or if she, the one ascending from the mikvah, has intercourse with her husband first before this other man has intercourse with whoever he's going to have intercourse with, a spirit of immorality will overtake her. In other words, these people they had a moment where he saw her naked and she saw him seeing her naked, and this is absolutely prohibited. It's immodest. A woman should never be seen by anyone other than her husband, nor should a man's nakedness be seen by anyone other. I mean, in the locker room, that's something else. That's not what we're talking about. But a man's nakedness should never be seen by any woman other than his wife, just like the wife's nakedness should never be seen by anyone other than her husband. And if that did happen, so then they're subject that their mind could be filled with all kinds of immoral thoughts. And what is his remedy? He should say this. From Psalms 107, verse 40, he pours contempt upon princes and causes them to wander in the waste where there is no way. And truthfully, we've seen elsewhere, if you're ever in that situation where, you're careful to guard your eyes and not see, the kind of, it's obviously not pornography, but even these days, you could be reading a standard magazine or see a regular television program and see, really lascivious images. Our culture is just saturated with lascivious imagery. And so if you're a person who's trying to guard their eyes from seeing that stuff, but then you do see it, what is your remedy? Torah. Like just start to think about Torah, recite a verse of Torah. Almost any verse will do. Anything from scripture to get your mind back into, positive, upright, ascending type of thoughts. Rather than what you've just seen and start to spiral down into, fantasy and lasciviousness. But this is a particularly appropriate verse for that, according to the sages on our page. Rav Yitzhak said, what is the meaning of that which is written, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Psalm 23, verse 4. This is a person who sleeps in the shadow of a single palm tree and in the shadow of the moon. Despite his dangerous position, he trusts in God and is not afraid. And the Gemara qualifies the previous statement. And with regard to one who sleeps in the shadow of a single palm tree, we said he is in danger only if the shadow of another palm tree does not fall upon him. However, if the shadow of another palm tree falls upon him, we have no problem with it. So what they're saying here is, first of all, nighttime, of course, is a much more dangerous time in terms of the number of evil spirits and demons that are roaming around in our world. You're more likely to encounter them at night. And when there's moonlight, then they could be more visible. They could be more apparent. They could leave tracks. So it's a time of greater danger for them, for the demons. So what do? They're out there at night, but when there's moonlight, it's very bright, so they want to hide. Where do they go? In the shadows. But if you're in a field, for example, and there's not that many shadows, greater danger. There's a palm tree. Okay, so they're going to go hide in the shadow of the palm tree, but the palm tree has such a narrow, insubstantial shadow. The palm tree is so thin, tall and thin, that if you sleep in the shadow of a palm tree, well, that's the place where the demon is going to be. You've narrowed, he's so likely to be in the shadow of the palm tree, and you're going to be there too, sleeping, that you're endangering yourself. The Gemara asks, but if there's two trees, it's less dangerous because then the demons can dart from the shadow of one to the shadow of another. They're going to be less likely to occupy the same space as you for any extended amount of time. The Gemara asks, what about that which was taught in a Baraisa? With regard to one who sleeps in the shadow of a single palm tree in a courtyard, and one who sleeps in the shadow of the moon, his blood is upon his own head. What are the circumstances? If we say that the shadow of another palm tree does not fall on him, well, he would also be harmed if he were in a field. Rather, one must not conclude from this Baraisa that if one is in a courtyard, even if the shadow of another tree fell on him, it remains dangerous. And the Gemara concludes, indeed, learn from it that this is so. Right? So sleeping outdoors in a courtyard under the moon, dangerous. dangerous, right? Perhaps one of the reasons why Jews don't like camping so much, at least camping outdoors. So if you're going to camp outdoors, don't be alone. If you're going to, if you're going to actually sleep outdoors, not in the tent, don't do so alone. Not saying it here on this page, but we've seen it elsewhere. I think it was in Tractate Brachas. Ruins are another place where demons hang out. So do not enter a ruin alone. But if you go with another person, you're safe, right? So demons like to attack isolated individuals, not people in groups of 2 or more. The Gemara adds, and with regard to the shadow of the moon, we said it is dangerous to sleep there only at the start of the month, when the moon shines in the east, and therefore its shadow is in the west. However, at the end of the month, when the moon shines in the west and its shadow is in the east, we have no problem with it. I don't have an explanation why it is safer when the moon is in the west and the shadow is in the east, but apparently it is. And the Gemara, I guess perhaps because the sun is coming soon and it will come in the east, and maybe that's why there's an extra measure of protection there. And the Gemara continues to discuss harmful spirits. One who relieves himself on the stump of a palm tree will be seized by a spirit of pain in half his head. In other words, a migraine headache. And one who places his head on the stump of a palm tree will be seized by a spirit of sickness. Don't get up close and personal with palm trees. That seems to be a theme today. One who walks over a palm tree, if the tree is cut down, he will be killed. If that tree is uprooted, he will be uprooted and then will die. And the Gemara comments, and this statement only applies if he does not place his legs on it. However, if he places his legs on it, we have no problem with it. In other words, if there's a palm tree across your path, don't step over it. Step on it and then go over it. The Gemara cites another statement with regard to shadows. There are 5 types of dangerous shadows. The shadow of a single palm tree, the shadow of a tree called kanda, the shadow of a caper bush, and the shadow of the sorb tree. Some say also the shadow of a ship and the shadow of a willow. The general rule of the matter is whatever has many branches, its shadow is dangerous. We're like, well, wait a minute. The palm tree is not one with many branches, although it does have many branches up high. But these big and bushy trees, also dangerous because there's many places for the demons to lurk there at night. The Gemara comments, the demons near the caper bush are called ruche. A demon found near the sorb trees is called shida. The demons, let me just make sure I got that pronouncing, shida. The demons found in gardens are called rishve. And the Gemara asks, what is the practical difference of these definitions? And it makes a difference for writing an amulet, right? So they had, both in the ancient world, the Talmudic era, and also later when we talk about the Hasidic masters, you know, kind of like those Jewish communities from 300-400 years ago. I mean, started 1,000 years ago, but as recently as 200-300 years ago, were very interested in warding off evil spirits and did so by writing amulets. So certain incantations or verses from Torah, and compiled in a certain way, and then it would be worn on a string around the neck or in other ways attached to the body, an amulet to ward off harm. And in fact, the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidic Judaism, in his youth, he was called the master of the good name, Baal Shem Tov, because he did write amulets for people. Nobody was holier and more attached to God and Torah than the Baal Shem Tov. So this really was a concern of the people. So while we know he wrote amulets, we don't have him, writing amulets for rabbis and Torah students, right? It's almost like people who are not involved in Torah really need this information more. And being a student of Torah and engaged in Torah learning and in prayer, for a large part of every day, actually keeps this sort of harm away. That's what I'm gathering as I read this. Let's continue. Where am I? Okay, so about writing an amulet. And the Gemara further comments, the demon found near the caper bush is a creature with no eyes. What is the practical halachic difference of this observation? It is relevant with regard to fleeing from it. And the Gemara relates, once a Torah scholar, so it's not that being a Torah scholar is any kind of absolute protection. We have had several examples of Torah scholars who were attacked by these demons. So once a Torah scholar went to relieve himself near a caper bush, and he heard the demon coming, and he fled from it. And when this evil spirit went, it grabbed a palm tree and got stuck there, and the palm tree dried out, and the demon burst. So he was protected, ultimately, the Torah scholar. And it was stated above that the demons found near the sorb tree are called shadei. And the Gemara comments, this sorb tree that is close to the city contains no less than 60 demons. And the Gemara asks, what is the practical difference of this statement? And the Gemara answers, it is relevant for writing an amulet for this number. And there was an incident. A certain ruler of a city walked and stood by a sorb tree that was near a city. And 60 shadei demons came upon him, and he was in danger. And one of the sages, who did not know that it was a sorb tree of 60 shadei, came and wrote him an amulet. But it was an amulet for one shida, for one demon. And that man heard that there was a celebration inside the tree, and the demons were singing. They were celebrating because he got an amulet that was not going to be effective against all of them. It was an amulet only to ward off evil from one demon, and there were 60 of them. So the amulet was going to be totally ineffective. They celebrated, and they said that this master who wrote the amulet doesn't know anything. He doesn't even know the blessing to say over a scarf, even though he's a rabbi, he's a Torah scholar. But then another one of the sages who knew that this sorb tree hid not one but 60 demons came and wrote an amulet against 60 demons, and he heard them saying, clear your items away from here, meaning the demons said, time to move on. We need another tree somewhere. We are going to not be very effective as demons in this tree anymore. The Gemara discusses the Ketev Mariri, a demon mentioned in the Torah. So this is actually a verse from Deuteronomy 32:24. And the verse reads, the bloating of famine, battles of flaming demons, Ketev Mariri, and the teeth of beasts shall I dispatch against them with the venom of those that creep on the earth. So there we actually have a mention in the Torah itself of God dispatching demons, to do their thing, fulfilling God's purpose, right? So God allows these demons to exist for God's own purposes. They're not somehow arrayed against God. They may be looking to attack, God's creation, the humans, but so are many wild animals, right? So there's some reason that these demons exist, and they are mentioned in the Torah. So there are two types of Ketev demons, one that comes from before noon in the morning, and the other one that comes in the afternoon. And the one that comes before noon is called Ketev Mariri, and it appears in a jug of kutach, a Babylonian spice that we've encountered before. It's a dairy spice made with moldy bread, milk, and salt, very strong salt. And it continuously revolves around inside it. And the Ketev in the afternoon is called Ketev Yashud Saharayim, from Psalms 91, verse 6, and it appears inside the horn of a goat and revolves around inside it like a sifter. And the Gemara relates, Abaye was coming and walking along the street, and Rav Papa was walking on his right, and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, was on his left. Abaye saw a certain Ketev Mariri coming on his left side, looked over his shoulder, and it was a demon, or let's say he's coming this way, and he's going to pass, the demon's going to pass by on his left, where Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, is. So what did he do? So Abaye switched Rav Papa to his left and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, to his right. So now it's Rav Papa who's going to encounter this demon that's coming toward them. And Rav Papa said to Abaye, "And I, what is different about me that you were not concerned about any possible harm to me?" And Abaye said to him, "The time is in your favor." Right? So this is another understanding of the sages we've seen before. Some people are having a string of good luck, right? Things are going their way, right? So that, people where things are going their way, you can expect their luck will end at some point. But for now, things are going their way. So that's a person who is at least currently in some kind of a state of grace, and they're going to be protected from the attack of these evil spirits, at least more so than someone who's just, average or who's impoverished and who seems, might be a little bit more vulnerable to this kind of attack. Rav Papa was very rich. We've discussed that before, and very learned, and all his 10 sons became Torah scholars as well. So things really kind of generally went well for Rav Papa for most of his life, and so he seemed to enjoy some kind of a protection from these spirits. From the 1st of Tammuz, the month of Tammuz, to the 16th of that month, these demons are certainly found, and from here onward it is uncertain whether they are found or whether they are not found, and they can be found in the shadow of a sea squill that has not grown a cubit, and in the shadow of objects in the morning and evening when their length is less than a cubit. And they are mostly found in the shadow of a privy. So that's definitely a place that you don't want to go, is walking around an outhouse, and certainly not get into the shadow beside the outhouse. Rav Yosef said, and now I'm almost done, so if you have questions or comments, get them in there. Rav Yosef said, "These three matters cause blindness to the light of one's eyes. 1, one who combs his hair when it is dry. 2, one who drinks wine that is dripping from the barrel. And 3, one who puts on shoes when his feet are wet after being washed." So one who combs his hair when it is dry, static, for some reason that's going to bring blindness to the light of one's eyes. One who drinks wine that is dripping from the barrel. Well, that is a kind of avarice, right? If you can't wait for the wine to get into the glass before you drink it, the sages are definitely not going to approve of that behavior, and it could even cause blindness for you. And this I could just hear my grandmother and my mother. Don't put your shoes on when your feet are still wet. That seems like common sense to me. And if a food is hanging in one's house, it causes poverty. This is, as people say in a popular proverb, he who hangs the basket hangs his sustenance. In other words, he loses it. Now, we said this only about hanging bread. However, if one hangs meat and fish, we have no problem with it, as those items are typically hung in a house. But bread, you don't want to hang bread in the house. You want to store it carefully, not out and exposed like that. And drying it is only going to harm the bread. So here we're learning, and this the last thing that we're going to share today, is this idea that bread, now we've already seen what makes a meal a meal. You could eat a lot of food, but if there's no bread with it, according to the sages, it's actually considered a snack. If you have bread with it, then you have to make a special blessing over the bread. Now it's considered a meal, and therefore when you finish, you're obligated to recite the grace after meals. It's bread that is very, very important. Bread represents livelihood. Bread represents sustenance. Bread, like the manna that came from heaven, is what it's all about. Bread represents the idea that God gives us our needs. It's all embodied in bread as a symbol. Therefore, the sages advise us to be quite meticulous with bread. And the reason is that it is common. I'm sorry. And now bran in the house causes poverty. And we have a note here. What do you mean? Like, I love bran buds. It's the kind of cereal that I like. Is that going to cause me to become impoverished? No, that's not what they mean. What they mean is if you can afford to have good quality bread, but because you're miserly and cheap, you buy the cheapest kind of bread, that will lead to poverty, right? If you're poor and all you can afford is cheap bread, okay, God bless you. This is not a problem. But if you can afford to have good bread in your house and you only buy the cheapest kind of bread, then it's like you're sort of, it's a little bit insulting to God who's giving us all our needs. Likewise, breadcrumbs in the house cause poverty. If these crumbs are spread throughout the house on Friday nights or on Tuesday nights, when demons are present, harmful spirits rest on them. And this is a generally valid teaching. Be careful of bread, right? And so it is actually a practice that by the Shabbos table, when we're finished eating, when we're cleaning up, one should take special concern, special care to gather up the breadcrumbs from the table. We had challah, we passed challah around. There's always going to be some breadcrumbs on the table. Be careful with the breadcrumbs. Gather them up carefully and dispose of them respectfully. Ideally, keep them and then feed them to the birds at some point so they really don't go to waste. But if there's no way that they can be used for something, and making bread pudding out of old stale bread, but what you never want to do is throw bread away where it could have been used for something. And if you must throw it away, do so carefully. Right? Not with contempt, like wrap it carefully, put it in the trash. Don't just throw it in the trash, lower it into the trash, but show with your actions that you are appreciative of the gift of bread in your life. And that signals to God and his messengers that you're appreciative of the blessings in your life and you don't take them for granted. Whereas if you're very careless with bread and let crumbs go all over the place and get on the floor and then just sweep them away and not care, so then it's like somebody who doesn't care about money. It's like somebody who doesn't care about heat. It's like somebody who doesn't care, somebody who just takes everything for granted, and perhaps all those things that you take for granted will be removed from you because you're not showing the proper appreciation. Okay. Let us go to comments and questions. With regard to the rule of 3, which we discussed earlier, where did that come up? We covered so much ground today, but I know I was talking about a chazaka when something gets established as happening 3 times. I just forgot what we were actually talking about at the beginning of the page today. Maybe Nina will send me a note about that. But with regard to that, Tom says, Lewis Carroll, nice Lewis Carroll quote, "What I tell you 3 times is true." Very good. 3 times makes us hurt. 2 times could be a coincidence. Pauline says, the Greeks and Italians spit to ward off the evil eye, and this is why opera singers tell each other "toi, toi, toi" before going on stage. So there we go. Another one of these familiar traditions. Thank you. Let me see. Joseph Aggs says, good Shabbos. It seems like these demons are more like mischief makers than a real danger, or at least some of them. I think to some extent that's true. However, you can get yourself into danger. So, avoid the trouble. Avoid the trouble. Sharon, I'm sorry, wait, what was that? I don't know that story, so I'm not going to comment on that. And then Sharon says, how do they define the shadow of the moon? I think the shadow of the moon simply means don't put yourself in the shadows at night, right? So when the moon is shining bright, and so there's much more light than normally is at night, that's when there's, strong shadows as well. So at night is that's the realm of these evil spirits. They're out there at night. But when it's a bright moonlit night, then they lurk in the shadows, so they're more concentrated in areas. And that seems to be a lot of what they're talking about here, right? There's so many of these evil spirits all over the place. We just don't see them because they're operating in the spiritual realm, but that realm sort of coincides with our physical space. So what we want to avoid is areas where they concentrate, and they concentrate in the shadows. And finally, Brandon, does the Talmud explain what demons are? In other Abrahamic religions, demons are viewed as angels who rebelled against heaven. Yeah, not so much here. Like, what actually are they and where do they come from? And, at least not in these pages. One thing I have heard, which is interesting, is that, every time we do a mitzvah, it's like an angel is created who will advocate for us on the day that we are judged. Every time we make a transgression, a demon is created who will advocate against us on the day that we are judged. So one understanding is that they come into being, from our transgressions, and they're kind of released out there into the world. That is almost a little bit, like this idea of what is a haunted house. It's a place where a terrible crime, a murder was once committed, and there's kind of like a vestigial trace of that. I mean, now, you could just poo-poo that and say, oh, come on, that's just superstitious, supernatural nonsense. But I believe that, isn't it a law, at least in certain jurisdictions, that if a house had a terrible murder committed in it, the realtor who's selling that house eventually has to disclose that to the buyer. And it's an odd law, right? It could only have a supernatural basis. Otherwise, what difference does it make that a murder was committed there? The house has been cleaned. It's not like any physical remnant of that crime that happened there long ago. And yet somehow, people care about that. There's some kind of a spiritual residue that remains after these terrible crimes, and maybe there's a lesser residue that remains even after lesser transgressions. That's just me speculating. In terms of a more exhaustive understanding of really what are demons and where do they come from, we're not going to find any this is the answer on that, right? It's just kind of multiple streams within the tradition. And here we're sort of, one thing that we see from these pages that we're in, and it's going to be a little bit more tomorrow before we leave this area, is that, they just take it as a given that these spirits exist, and that information can be gleaned about them and how they operate and how to, avoid them, which is basically what we want to do, just avoid them altogether. We certainly don't want to have truck with them. But yeah, it's just part of the tradition. But as we've seen, right, in the Holy Land, much less concern about any of this. In Babylonia, much more concern because the sages were living and operating and teaching within a greater culture that was much more concerned with these evil spirits. All right, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. We should be blessed with a beautiful, uplifting, musical, peaceful, energizing Shabbos, and no connection to what we've been learning about in terms of evil spirits, except to say, by our Shabbos tables tonight, by our Friday night tables, let's rejoice and be happy and thankful that we're there. And when the meal ends, let's be careful with the breadcrumbs and dispose of them respectfully. And ideally, if they can be saved and given to animals who will appreciate them, even better. But if not, dispose of them respectfully and don't let them just get swept off onto the floor. Have a great night and good Shabbos.